I'm Sean Adams, and I'd like to welcome you to the Foundations of Branding. For 30 years, I've worked with some of the world's largest brands to help create a strong and consistent message. I teach branding and brand identity at Art Center College of Design and have written several books on the subject. Branding goes beyond a simple logo design, brochure, or website. It is a process that addresses the big ideas of successfully communicating a company's unique message. I want you to have a clear understanding of how to deal with the client and reach the best outcome. Knowing what to ask and who knows the answer is a critical element of the process. Research, interviews, and presentation are as important as designing something wonderful. We'll define what a logo, wordmark, icon, and color palette are, and consider how they all work together as a cohesive system. And we'll navigate the handoff of a branding system and how to create an ongoing relationship with the client. I've seen too many graphic designers with rare and amazing talents limited to designing only the logo, when I know they have the brain power to do so much more. I want you to move past a singular project and become an integral partner with the client. You don't need to be the best logo designer in the world. Whether you are a beginner or seasoned veteran, this course will increase your understanding and concept of a designer's job. In the end, branding is about ideas and thinking big. Welcome to the Foundations of Branding. Let's go back in time to get a sense of the origin of branding. First, let's go way, way back. As soon as that first Stone Age human pounded out that first stone tool, he or she expected recognition. I made this. It's a human condition that we like making things, and when we do, we want others to know who made it. Branding began as a simple application of a symbol or mark on a piece of pottery or a brick. This wasn't simply a way to graffiti a name on the bottom of a vase. It was a way to identify who made it and where he or she lived. When a guest admired that bowl and noticed the stamp on the bottom, he said, "Hey Gaius, I really like that bowl. I need one too." And that unique symbol was a clear message telling the viewer where to go. For most of our civilization's history, the general public has been illiterate. Government, commerce, and religion use symbols and images to communicate a message. The ichthus symbol, resembling a fish, identified the early Christian church. Jewish communities used the Star of David as a symbol, while Muslims adopted the color turquoise as an identifier. It's important to recognize these symbols did more than simply identify the religion. They represented the entire belief structure. Every story, action, and interaction with Christianity, Judaism, or Islam was embodied in them. By the 18th century, high-end porcelain makers added a proprietary mark to their pottery. This increased the value and legitimacy of the object. Out west, ranchers used a hot brand to mark their cattle, hence the term branding. By the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and mass production changed the economy. Branding managed the job of identifying one teapot from another of lesser quality. And just like that bowl in ancient Rome, if I liked it, I'd look for the same brand again. For millennia, branding had identified who made the product, where it came from, and its quality. The competition was about to get much stiffer. In 1890, the options available to the typical consumer were limited compared to today. The local general store might carry one brand of flour, coffee, sugar, and salt. If you lived in a larger city, you might have access to more choices. By the 20th century, this changed. Mass production and easy transportation combined to give the consumer more choices than ever. To the manufacturers, this meant harder competition. To succeed, a product required quality, value, and a good reputation. But first, it had to catch the audience's attention. Let's use Morton Salt as an example. By 1911, the company decided to embark on their first national advertising campaign. Now, salt isn't that exciting as a visual, So the Morton Salt Girl was born. To prove that Morton salt would flow in rainy weather, the famous slogan, "When it rains, it pours," was adopted. This visual and message combined with the salt's quality worked, and Morton's is still the best-selling salt on the market. Many companies adopted the same literal approach of a clear illustration and slogan. RCA became synonymous with the terrier Nipper, listening to his master's voice on a gramophone. Some companies, however, understood the more complex issues of a clear brand presence. Before refrigerators were available, people bought soft drinks stored in ice coolers. Coca-Cola realized that a unique bottle shape would help identify and differentiate it from the other sodas. By the 1920s, Coca-Cola promoted the brand as part of the American way of life. As more products entered the marketplace, companies began to understand the need for a cohesive message and brand management. Many of these companies promoted their unique selling proposition, meaning they were the only or first option. Kodak was the first company allowing ordinary people to take photographs and have them printed. The name value was enough to maintain the brand and its dominance. As competition increased, they simplified the product for the user rather than making it more complex, and used this idea of ease of use as their primary branding message. The most successful companies were beginning to understand the importance of the audience's emotional connection to the brand. The goal was to connect to the viewer on a basic level, whether it was appealing to patriotism like Coca-Cola or promising the life of a movie star like Max Factor. The basics of modern branding were now in place. But without television or the internet, it lacked communication methods to reach the widest audience. After 1950, television became the dominant advertising tool. This forced companies to focus less on the written or spoken word for radio and more on a visual medium. Images became king. With the introduction of the internet and now mobile communication, imagery is the primary way we communicate as a culture. Companies quickly understood the importance of a unified visual message. The brand message was critical to differentiate from the competition. That message had to be consistent every time the audience interacted with it. The rise of advertising also made the core brand message important. Campaign ideas could change to maintain interest, but the brand center, or brand DNA, had to stay the same. Volkswagen's campaign during the 1960s is a great example. The brand message tells the audience that Volkswagen is alternative and made for people who value independence, not status. The ads changed copy and imagery, but never changed the main story. In the 1990s, as the Internet's use expanded, many brands ventured into websites with less than spectacular results. As a new medium, the rules weren't clear. Many brands simply replicated their ad campaigns online. And since the consumer already had that information, nobody cared. Today, every company, from a small restaurant to a Fortune 500 corporation, understands the importance of a website as a communication tool. The most successful use their website not as a duplication of the printed matter, but as a way to dig deeper into the brand. With the current expansion of mobile media, a clear brand message is even more critical. A brand must remain consistent in its message, whether in visual form on a poster or the text on a Twitter feed. Branding is far more complex today than it was in 1950. The vehicles to communicate may be more complex and constantly changing, but the job is still the same. Determine a strong, clear, unique, and compelling message for the brand, and use every opportunity to promote that message. Branding is perhaps the most overused and misunderstood word in graphic design. It has become the catch-all term encompassing logos, identity systems, slogans, and websites. So before we start with what is a brand, let's determine what isn't. First, and most importantly, a logo is not a brand unless it's on a cow. A logo is just that, a logo. Its job is to identify, not describe. The brand is the promise, reputation, and big idea. It is a highly valued asset. A brand creates emotional connections, good or bad. We respond to brands with loyalty or reject them. Let's start with the promise. Consider a brand such as FedEx. FedEx promises fast delivery and efficiency at a reasonable cost. The brand may engage in other activities, but that is the core concept that we expect. All of the communications, advertising, and messaging reinforces the FedEx promise. Next, what is the reputation? If I've had a good and reliable experience with FedEx and I approve of their actions, they have a good reputation. The opposite is true. Enron was named one of America's most innovative companies for years. Paul Rand designed the logo. This all changed, creating a fatal reputation with a scandal involving fraud. And finally, the big idea. McDonald's promises good food served quickly at a low cost. But the big idea is the reliability and safety of the same product, whether I am in Hong Kong or Chicago. I don't need to wonder if that hole-in-the-wall diner will be clean or dirty. I know that I can rely on McDonald's for a consistent experience. We are all tribal. Brands work with that sense of tribal identity. I am part of the Starbucks tribe, and Betty is with the Coffee Bean tribe. Jack is part of the BMW tribe. Jane identifies with the Mercedes tribe. Every branding effort is focused on ways to make these emotional connections and create loyalty. If successful, the brand turns the consumers into advocates and salespeople. These parts, the promise, reputation, and big idea, are typically out of our hands as designers. We cannot create a brand. The brand is created by the public's perception. And that perception is the result of many elements, from the reputation, actions, promises, customer service, to the product and graphic visuals. Walter Landver, one of America's most successful identity designers, said, "Products are created in the factory, brands are created in the mind." But I can't invade someone's mind, so what can I, as a designer, do? The brand that is created in the consumer's mind is the result of multiple components. We typically think of the visual aspect, but that is only a slice of a much larger pie. Every point of contact a consumer has with the company reinforces the brand perception. In the visual world, this is the message of the communications, the logo, the website, environment, and printed matter. These are important parts. The logo, for example, is the entry point to the brand. But what happens if I have a beautiful logo and the most exciting web presence, but the cashier is surly and disagreeable? All the visual success is trumped by a bad customer service experience. These are the touch points or places where the consumer comes into contact with the brand. The visuals. This includes the logo, identity system, printed matter, website, broadcast, and signage. Are they clear and professional, or convoluted and in disarray? Customer service. Does the customer receive courteous and efficient service? If so, they will have a good emotional connection with the brand. But if they are treated rudely or feel manipulated, the customer will have a negative perception of the brand. The product. Is the product useful and made with quality, or is it a badly manufactured knockoff? A good design solution can never make a bad product good. The company actions. Is the company engaged in sustainable practices, or are they burning rainforests? In today's market, the consumer is especially aware of the ethical conduct of a company. Employees. Are the employees treated fairly and compensated appropriately, or is the product created with sweatshop labor? This doesn't dictate that every company should be paying the highest salary possible, but people are aware of companies with discriminatory practices or bad working conditions. And finally, expectations. Does the product or experience meet or surpass what I expected? Did that hamburger taste as good as it looked on the commercial, or was it bland and overcooked? Clearly, there are a lot of variables at work here. The most successful companies are those that maintain strict quality control and brand management in each of these. It's a big job, and there's a reason why it's critical. Defining, servicing, and maintaining a good brand presence is a hard job. It takes time, resources, and good talent. Once the brand presence is in place, the job has only begun. The brand must be policed, but allowed to evolve. It's a lot of work, so why bother? Increased value and perception are the two primary reasons for all of this hard work. Value is about money, and perception is what we believe to be true. Let's start with increasing value. A good brand makes a good company. In an overcrowded and saturated marketplace, a good brand stands out. A weak one is dismissed. The next time you buy salt, ask yourself, why am I buying Morton's salt? Unless you're a master chef, salt is salt. But Morton's has maintained the lead for a century because we trust the brand. Compare your local grocery store brand coffee with Starbucks. Hill Valley Market coffee is a good quality option. It has a pleasant taste. Grandparents prefer the instant version. Each cup costs about 8 cents to make. At Starbucks, I can get a cup of coffee for a little more than $2. Why am I willing to spend over 4,000% more for Starbucks coffee? Is the quality 4,000% better than Hill Valley Market coffee? Of course, the answer is no. But the Starbucks visuals, store atmosphere, service, status, tribal connection, product and packaging, down to your name written on the cup, creates a remarkable brand experience. If Starbucks can maintain these promises, I will continue to buy coffee there, and I will tell my friends to go there also. I've become an unpaid salesperson for the Starbucks brand because it reinforces my identity. Perception is the second reason brand management is critical to any company's success. Reality is irrelevant compared to the perception. This is unfair, but a fact of life in a world of instant and multiple communication methods. Major brands have been rumored to be in league with Satan, hiding his symbol in the logo, or serving chickens so mutated they could no longer be called chicken legally. A rumor is impossible to contain, but the actual actions and products of a company create perception. As I talked about earlier, every interaction with a brand adds to this perception, and this response changes with each point of contact. A brand will always be either positive or negative. It will be clear or confused, or it will be friendly or hostile. No brand will ever be perceived neutrally. We constantly question our world and make decisions about what we purchase, whom we befriend, and what we believe. A product or company cannot survive without an intelligent brand strategy and ongoing management. That's where we enter the process. We've determined what a brand is, the promise, reputation, and big idea of a company. We know the importance of a strong brand message, and we've looked at the reasons why this is critical to a company's success. Now, where do I, as a graphic designer, fit into the process? Let's revisit the touch points. Clearly, I don't have the ability to manage the employees, corporate actions, product, customer service, expectations, or reputation of a client. I'm not a human resources expert and know less than my client about the product. It's my job to look at the big picture. From this, I can determine what works and what doesn't. I may not be qualified to create a new business strategy, but if terrible customer service or confused communication is part of the problem, it's my responsibility to point this out as part of the overall brand management. But I do understand visual communication and can work on the visuals and logo. Years ago, I was asked to design a new logo for VH1. I could have immediately started drawing logos, but I couldn't understand what I was trying to communicate. Finally, I spent time really looking at the brand as a whole. It was clear that the biggest issue was a lack of focus. I could make a great logo, but it would only be a band-aid. I created a document that showed the competition, what the internal employees believed the brand to be, and all of the existing visual pieces. The result was clear. There was no consensus about the brand message, and the product itself, the programming, was all over the place. Fortunately, the team at VH1, led by Fred Seibert, was smart and creative. They led the charge and moved the brand toward a singular idea: music first. The programming changed to focus only on popular music, with shows like Behind the Music. The visual solution then was much clearer. The logo and all visuals had to reinforce the idea of music. From the primary color, blue, connected to the blues and blue suede shoes, to a tagline connected to the final mark. Our job as designers is to address the visual elements, but we can't do this without a clear message. And if one doesn't exist, it's our job to work with a client and make one. It's not as simple as it sounds. Getting past a client's initial idea that their brand is about quality is tricky. So is everyone's. Nobody is about bad quality. It's our job to dig deeper, to look at the competition and find the one thing that is unique and compelling. The world of branding is a complex world with multiple ways of communicating. The days of a nice logo and print campaign are gone. Today, we cover our bases and manage all points of communication, from a poster to a Facebook page. My first step is to determine a clear strategy. Now, this is often misunderstood, and designers barge into meetings with the CEO, claiming to understand the business issues. Unless you have an MBA, it's best to leave that to people who actually have an MBA. When we talk about strategy in the context of design, we are talking about communication strategy. What is the client saying, to whom, and how? Once I know the answers to these questions, and the client has agreed on the message, I can start designing. And the best place to start is the logo. The logo is the entry point to the brand. It's the visual expression of a brand's identity and values. It's shorthand, and it tells the viewer who is speaking and what they believe. It doesn't describe the client's business, it identifies it. The visual system is the kit of parts that give the client a proprietary look. Being consistent with typography, color, images, and style helps the viewer identify the brand quickly. This also reinforces the brand message. Is it luxurious and rich, serious and stable, or innovative and new? The goal is to combine all of these elements, the logo, color palette, typography, images, and style, with the right words to communicate a clear message. If it's done well, I should be able to know what the brand is without seeing the name or logo. The process will require frequent check-in with the client. This is collaboration between you and the client. Ongoing communication and review of alternative ideas helps guide the solution to the right message. You will never know your client's business better than they do, so it's important to work with them. Now, remember, clients are civilians, not designers. They may not know the best way to express their thoughts. Patience, while pulling the visual elements together, is, as always, a virtue. I've been hired to design a logo for a client, but the client's business is in trouble and they don't know why. They think a new logo will freshen up the look and solve the problems, but unfortunately, it won't. If the product is bad or the company is in the midst of a scandal, a new logo is like putting lipstick on a pig. Now, I can go ahead, knowing there are larger issues, and design the logo and take the money. But that isn't particularly ethical and won't result in a long-term working relationship. My goal is to help define and communicate the brand, identifying any issues I see, and help the client succeed. To do this, I need information. While Wikipedia is an easy tool, it won't answer the questions I have. I need to get in the trenches and talk to people. It's scary when we are used to sitting behind a computer and designing by ourselves, but it will always make a better solution. First, I want to know what the current brand strategy is, if there is one. If so, what does the client think works and what doesn't? This isn't about the visuals, it's about the message. What does the client believe he or she is communicating? I need to understand the audience. Who is the current audience and who do they want it to be? Don't let someone get away with everyone. That's too broad. The chances are good that there is a primary and secondary audience. Now, who should it be in 5 years? Will that audience stay with the brand, or do they need to expand or contract? Who is the client's competition? Is there anyone else doing exactly the same thing? Are they more successful or gaining from behind? What is their brand message? Go beyond the expected. One of my clients was a nonprofit library foundation. The obvious competition was bookstores and online books. But other cultural institutions and museums were also encroaching on the client's audience. When we talk about values in branding, we aren't talking about political issues. The values refer to the most basic beliefs a client has. Often, this is where the company started. When Gap opened its first store in 1969, the founders followed these principles: creativity, delivering results, doing what's right, and always thinking of our customers first. These principles guide what they produce, how they interact with their employees and customers, and what they communicate. If the values had been make money fast, for example, the quality, interaction with the consumer, and message would be entirely different, and probably not successful. Determining the correct core audience and reaching a clear set of values is like an archaeology project. You may need to dig deeper and spend time sifting through the information to reach the right answer. And remember to do this collaborating with the client. They may not be the best at filtering the information, but that's what we do. My first impulse, like most designers, is to put the pencil to the page. In that initial meeting with the client, I find myself solving the problem in my head. This would be fine if there were no real issues to manage and I only cared about the design. But in order to do the job right, I need to buckle down and research. As we've already discussed, I need to know about the current brand strategy, competition, audience, goals, strengths, and weaknesses. The best way to find this information is to sit down and talk with people. If the client is a small company or sole proprietor, I talk with the owner. If there are more employees, I make appointments to meet with as many employees as possible. Just as I want to know what the CEO thinks, I also want to know what the person in the mailroom thinks. The information is broader and more realistic with more input. Talking to a salesperson may not give me the information I need to determine a course of action, but it will help me and the client to know how well the employees understand the brand. If everyone at a company has a different idea, the message to the outside world will be confused and schizophrenic. I need to learn about the client's competition. He or she may be able to name their closest competitors, but it will take more research on my part to learn about the next level of competition. I can do this research online, in the library, or in person. When I was working on an admissions project for a university, one of our designers began the application process for several other colleges. This gave us great insight about the competition's communications and responses. Identifying the correct audience is critical. Surgical marketing with clear messages can only happen when you know whom you are trying to reach. Otherwise, you're telling a story so broad nobody cares. That's called spray and pray. You can determine who the current audience is by talking with clients, salespeople, communications department, and marketing. Identify a few customers to hear their point of view. Typically, the CEO will be the best source to determine who the audiences should be in the future. Another good tool is online analytics for a website or Facebook page. Values, goals, and the promises are the territory of the owner or CEO. I think of his or her information as the core. I've seen many instances where a designer says, "My client is dumb. That's a bad business choice." Or an employee will insist the direction is wrong. But in the end, if the CEO decides the company is about sustainable practices, innovation, creativity, and risk-taking, then that's the right direction. It's his or her company. It's our job as designers to make that vision tangible. A client is often too close to the issue to clearly identify all the strengths and weaknesses. He or she may recognize that the product is good, but the distribution is slow. However, there will be issues that you need to find. Again, that's where talking with employees and customers work. The point here is not to open the dialogue for a complain fest. It's to find the areas that are working and those that can be improved. It's important to not cheat yourself on this phase. It's your time and expertise that is gathering a wealth of information that the client doesn't have. It's a hard job, and it takes time and intelligence. Make sure you have a phase and budget in your contract specifically for research. Without this step, jumping into the visuals on a branding project is like a doctor operating without asking any questions. I hate meeting with clients. I've been doing this job for 3 decades, and I still get nervous before a meeting. Nevertheless, I need to do it. It's tempting to communicate only by email, but that never works. Never. I need to sit in a room with someone physically to hear what they are saying, how they say it, and what their body language is saying. We're hardwired as humans for social interaction, and pretty good at understanding each other face to face. Once I'm sitting down with a client, employees, or customers, I can get to the questions. First, I make sure that he or she understand that the discussion is confidential, and I'm not writing down who said what. Nobody wants to be dragged into the CEO's office because I leaked that Jane said, "The marketing department is confused." This is information gathering, not interrogation. I keep my questions open-ended and neutral. Don't you hate your newsletter design? Is leading, and the person you're sitting with probably worked on it. What do you think about the newsletter is better? Start with what. For example, what are the company's primary values? What are the company's strengths and weaknesses? What message is the company communicating now? What should the company be communicating? And in a perfect world, describe what the company will be in 5 years. Take notes by hand. Using a digital recorder scares people, and they clam up. Then move into the who. Who is the company's primary audience and stakeholders? Who should the audience be? Who is the primary competition? Remember, it's your job to gather the information, not disagree or argue. This is the chance for the client to do all the talking. Now it's time for how. How does the company reach the current audience? How does the company define itself to the outside world? How does the company communicate its values to the employees? Each of these questions could be broken into more detailed ones, but these are the basics. You may need to tailor them for different clients. In some instances, you might need to know more about a product. Will it remain the same? Does the audience like it? And does it work with the company's values? Whether you're an introvert or love working with others, this is the time to put away the fear. I tell myself I can stow it at the door and pick it up when I leave. It's your job to keep the conversation professional, but light, comfortable, and friendly. So stay away from one bright light bulb, a hard table and chair in a basement. Have a nice lunch somewhere relaxed for your discussion. Now that I've gathered interviews, research, analytical data, and existing visual material, it's time to do the hard work. It's time to solve the problem. But don't worry, you're not in this alone. You should still be collaborating with your client. It's a back and forth process to reach a solution everyone can own. There is a difference between regurgitation and strategy. It's not your job to throw back every tiny detail of your research to the client. That's part of the process. But you've been hired to solve a problem. I've seen too many strategy documents that are simply pages of interviews, data, and bad stock photos. The client could do this alone. Taking all of this information and determining the correct communication strategy is where it gets messy. This is the creative part, and creativity is never nice and neat. I take the answers one by one. What are the company's primary values? I may have 10 differing ideas. The CEO's answer is the right one. I may need to do some simplifying and remove anything redundant, but the answer is usually right there. Years ago, I had a client with many different answers, so I went back 100 years to the company's founder and discovered that his vision was honor and service. That trumped all the others. Use the information about the values and work with the CEO and other stakeholders to create a list of 5 to 8 words. These will be the guiding words when you start to design. Go back to your findings about the company's strengths and weaknesses. Make lists of all the answers and eliminate the duplicates. Even if they aren't true, these are the perceptions. What message is the company communicating now, and what should the company be communicating? What does the visual collateral say? Is it clear or confused? Is there a message or just a mess? Do the logos, color, typography, and image reinforce what the client thinks he or she is communicating? If not, you need to be able to show how it isn't. In part 2 of this, we'll explore the solutions for the audience, competition, and medium. Our goal in the end is to find answers that can help you determine the best approach for the message, visuals, and choice of media. You've pulled together the information that points to an answer with the values, strengths, weaknesses, and message. Now it's time to delve into the rest of the research and determine a strategy for the communication and visual direction. Who is the company's primary audience and stakeholders? I compare the answers I have from my interviews with the analytical research from data. The answers may be 100% correct, but if they are different than the reality, again, I need to show facts to prove this. Who should the audience be? The answer is based on the CEO's goals. It may take some work to move out of everyone. You might break the audience into the different groups, the core group, secondary, and general public. However, if he or she wants the audience to be only men with an eye patch, then it's my job to learn what that audience values and how to reach them. You're free to have an opinion here. You're an expert, not a doormat. You can certainly suggest that this group might be too narrow, but it's the client's company and goals. Who is the company's primary competition? The answer to this will come from the interviews and your own research. Who is the most direct and current competition? Who is the next level out? And who is a minimal threat? Now it's time for how. How does the company reach the current audience? You've gathered the visual collateral and looked at all the touch points. This is a list of those. There are probably some that the client hasn't considered. Remember to include all social media, even if it's not coming directly from the client, but secondhand. How does a company define itself to the outside world? The answer here is more about the primary media than the message. Does the company define itself through the web and a magazine? Is it a mix of media? What media fits the company's goals best? If it's a nonprofit helping homeless people, the internet may not be the best media for those without access. Perhaps inexpensive newsletters are a better choice. How does the company communicate its values to the internal audience? Many times a client forgets to talk with the internal audience, the employees and business partners. But this is as important as the external audience. If I think I work for a company that cares about homeowners' financial stability, and Joe thinks we are a car loan company, the message we tell and the choices we make will be out of sync with the vision. Does the internal audience have a place to go online to learn about the goals and vision? Is there any training or a manual? In the end, you won't have one clear answer for all of these questions. They can be subjective. You will, however, have the tools needed to make choices about the design solution and media to use. And you can use this information to back up your work with hard facts. It's been said that persuasion is 90% of the job in graphic design. This isn't about forcing a client to let you have your way. It's about convincing someone that your solution is the right one. Designers live in a world of possibilities and design. Most of our clients rely on facts and figures to make decisions. So we need to take the messy creative process and our seemingly subjective decision-making and create a logical presentation in their language. First, the presentation needs to be put into a format that can be projected, displayed on a monitor, or printed. I use a landscape, tabloid-sized document and create the file in InDesign. This is similar to a screen proportion and is inexpensive to print. Provide a title page with the project name, client, date, and your name. You can also add information on the master page with the project, date, and your name. The presentation may be viewed after you have left the building. Someone with little knowledge of the project may look at it and have questions. Design the presentation with this in mind. Make it understandable to a child. Restate the assignment. I find it useful to provide the question someone may be asking and then answer it. List your research questions, who, how, and what, on individual pages. Keep the pages as simple and clear as possible. If you put all the questions on one page, the viewer can be confused. Now answer the questions the same way, on individual pages. Give the viewer time to let the information sink in. Keep the answers as simple as possible. You can present the backup information of research and interviews at the end of the document. Add your list of 5 to 8 words to describe the values. Before this point, you should have finalized these with the CEO and anyone else involved. If answers are complicated, it's a good idea to use diagrams. Everyone is visual. Even mathematicians live in a world of television, movies, and advertising. It may be clearer to show the audience in a visual rather than a paragraph. Incorporate other visuals to clarify your findings. Don't list the competition, use the logos. Show all of the current visual material you've collected on one page. This is a good way to see the breadth of the work at once, something clients rarely do. Typically, the materials won't feel like a common and consistent family. That's not apparent until the client sees it as a whole. Remember, someone in the room, or who might see the document later, probably had a hand in some of the existing materials. It's a good idea to not say, "Boy, this is ugly." Find a positive attribute. And finally, add a call to action. Tell the client what should happen. The next step is to take this information and proceed to the design studies. And remember to end with a page that says, "Thank you." You've done the hard job, pulling together the research, analyzing the information, and proposing a clear idea and direction for the brand. It's all good in theory, but now it's time to make it real. The best way to do that is to start making and create the visual system. I found that the visuals lead the idea and make it real. All the other elements of a brand follow the visuals. We've established that a logo will never live in a void. You might start designing a visual approach with the logo, and that's a good place to begin. The entire identity system, however, will either support the brand message or confuse it. An identity system is the combination of all the pieces that work together, maintaining a singular voice for the brand. The logo is one part. Now add a proprietary color palette, choice of typefaces, image style, choice of materials, and copy style. I like to think of an identity system as a set of Legos. You can make all kinds of things from Legos, but whether it's a house or car, they will always be Legos. If I try to add pieces from a different set of wooden blocks, I end up with a mess. The system also exists to be passed on to other designers. Think of who will be using it once you are finished. If it's a creative company with talented designers in-house, you might design a system that has more pieces, a broader color palette, more typographic options, and different ways to handle an image. Give them a wider berth to create, and they will be less inclined to abandon your system. The opposite is also true. If the client is less sophisticated when working with designers, or the company has been proven to run off the rails visually, it's good to make a more stringent system. Limit the color palette to 1 or 2 options. Use only one typeface and one style of images. The goal is consistency and maintaining the brand message. Maintaining an identity system and brand message will lead to easy recognition by the audience. If the message is simple and clear, and the visual language is unique and compelling, the audience will eventually be able to identify the brand without seeing the logo or product. In our world of millions of visual messages hitting us from all sides, this is imperative for a company to succeed. I've followed a few simple rules about logos for most of my career. I use the rules myself when designing, and more importantly, I share them with the client on every presentation. A client might be a genius with web apps, but few know what makes a logo work, so give them a hand. First, good logos identify, they do not describe. The most successful logos tell me who the brand is, not what it does. This is like your name. I know you might be Jane, but that doesn't tell me whether you're nice or a jerk. This is tricky. Most clients want a logo that shows what they do or what product they make. But consider Apple. If the logo was a little illustration of the first Macintosh, they could never venture into iTunes, iPhones, and all the other products that are now part of the Apple family. By remaining neutral and focusing on a clear identifier, the client can evolve and grow in any direction. Second, a logo cannot solve every problem. As we discussed previously, the logo is there to reinforce the brand message. It can't fix a company's profits if the distribution process in shipping is flawed. The logo is a good Armani suit. It makes me look professional, well-groomed, and confident, but can't help me if I have an awful personality. Third, the logo must be visually engaging. This is true for all design. The logo must be strong and clear. This is the place to make sure the viewer can see the logo from across the room. Weak, quiet, and recessive logos disappear. Tiny lines, itsy-bitsy typography, and pastel colors rarely succeed against bold, aggressive, and vibrant logos. Fourth, the logo must have mnemonic value. In other words, it must be memorable. One of the best tools to achieve this is to pose a question. Not what is the meaning of life, but something as simple as, why is the O in mobile red? This engages the viewer, and the more time someone spends pondering even an unconscious question, the more memorable the logo. Another tool is to let something read 2 ways. Once someone sees the arrow in the FedEx logo, they never forget it. Fifth, the logo must be able to exist in a variety of media. 20 years ago, most logos lived in print. Today, a logo will be on screen, on a website, or a mobile application. It will be in print, on business cards and publications, and it will exist in the real world on a sign or billboard. This makes our job a little harder. We need to make sure fine details won't be chewed up by pixels on a screen, and that the form will be flawless even at 20 feet tall. Sixth, a logo is not an illustration. Illustrations are illustrations. Logos are logos. This goes back to the issue of identifying, not describing. A singular icon and letter forms will last much longer than a complex illustration showing the company's product. Staying away from illustrations is also a good way to make sure the logo is not too complicated to reproduce. I had a client who insisted I use a specific image as the basis for the logo. I was able to convince him otherwise by suggesting we use that image on the magazine cover and allow the logo to be a clear identifier. 7. A logo is the foundation of the visual system. The logo is the entry point to the brand message, but the entire identity system is the whole story. It's easy to get fixated on the logo design and go back and forth with the client. But they should never be shown any logo out of context. Always make sure the logo is on an application with the rest of the identity system. How does it work in a letterhead, brochure, or packaging? Of course, rules are made to be broken, and there may be instances where one or more of these don't apply, but I haven't found that yet. There are many words used to describe a logo: wordmark, icon, symbol, signature, ID, brand mark, trademark, and probably more that I haven't heard. I can't keep track of all the new ways to call it, so I stay with the basics: wordmark, monogram, icon, and logo. Let's begin with the wordmark. A wordmark is just that, a word that is a mark. It's the company name typeset in a proprietary way and used consistently. Some of the most successful brands in history use a wordmark, such as Ford, Saks Fifth Avenue, and Facebook. The upside of a wordmark is that it is easy to identify. I can read the name and know who the company is. I don't need to decipher a symbol or remember a special icon. The downside is that it relies on reading. It may not be easily understood in other languages like Chinese or Arabic. Some wordmarks, like Coca-Cola, transcend this problem, but that's taken over 100 years and billions of dollars to be recognized globally simply by the shape of the letter forms and the color. Another issue with a wordmark is the tendency for people to try to make it on their own. A non-designer might say, "I can make that logo on my memo form. I have a font like that." That's not good. It creates confusion for the audience and diminishes the equity of the mark. A wordmark must be unique enough to discourage civilians from trying to make it alone. A good wordmark isn't simply typeset. It should be a proprietary set of letter forms, easy to read and memorable. The wordmark is not a typeset word. It's an icon of a name. The letter forms in a successful wordmark have been modified to read faster. The mobile wordmark has an incredibly low cap height and simplified forms. It has perfect circles and straight lines that all match. This isn't possible with Futura out of the box. It isn't a typeface. It's customized and refined. Don't get trapped in the world of hardline sans serif letter forms. Some of the most interesting wordmarks are scripts or feel handwritten. The point is to create an iconic representation of the name that expresses the brand attributes. We usually think of the initials on a shirt or handkerchief when we hear the word monogram. It's a term and approach also used in branding and identity. A monogram is simply the initial of a company, or at times a single letter. This is a good solution if the client has a long and unwieldy name. It also helps move a brand into new territory by eliminating a name that may no longer apply. IBM was originally International Business Machines. The first logo was an illustration of a globe and the full name. By the time Paul Rand designed the current mark, IBM had changed and did much more than make adding machines. Moving away from the full name helped IBM evolve into other businesses. One of my favorite monograms is the NASA logo, designed by Richard Dan. NASA stands for National Aeronautics and Space Administration. That's a mouthful. As the agency was typically referred to as NASA, Dan rode the horse the direction it was riding and created a clear and simple monogram. Other successful monograms include MTV, Music Television, which started with a three-dimensional form that contained a range of patterns and colors. ABC is the American Broadcasting Company. The simple circular shapes are easier to remember than the full name and is more neutral as the brand expands into new areas. The Westinghouse logo is a merger of a symbol and the initial W that abstractly talks about electricity and connections. The downside of a monogram is the ubiquity of acronyms in the world. There are so many versions of a set of initials that it's easy to confuse them. Is UBS a bank or television network? The upside to a monogram is faster recognition and the ability to create a brand with more options than a descriptive name. Our lives are filled with all kinds of symbols. We see simple-to-understand icons, such as a cross or plus sign, and know what they mean. We can understand more complex symbols, such as the American flag, communicating patriotism, or an apple that might be a symbol for knowledge or New York. Icons are logos that rely on symbolism. They work when we understand what they mean and whom they belong to. They are incredibly powerful and cross cultures and languages. But there are so many icons today that it takes a long time for one to become successful. An icon can be literal, such as Greyhound Bus Line's Running Greyhound. Others are abstract, like the Nike swoosh. Icons that have succeeded took years of repeated exposure before they could stand on their own. The Apple logo was connected to the Apple name for 2 decades before the icon was recognizable enough to drop the word mark. An icon is not an illustration. It is a symbol that we'll need to reproduce in all media. It should relate to the brand message. The Chase Manhattan icon is based on a Chinese coin. The CBS Eye was designed when the Columbia Broadcasting Company entered television. Overly abstract icons are, frankly, hard to make and hard to remember. For several years, every client seemed to want an icon that communicated coming together. The result was lots of strange shapes merging in the center. These may have communicated the idea abstractly, but were so ubiquitous that the audience didn't see them. When the solution is an icon, I suggest that we link the name to the symbol for at least a few years. This gives the audience a chance to recognize it. It may seem like hammering someone with the same idea over and over. You and your clients see the same icon all day long, but the audience might see it for a few seconds and not again for a week. Branding is about communicating the message. That takes time and typically repeated exposure. It's like your grade school teacher taught you when doing a speech. Tell the audience what information you're going to tell them. Tell them the information, and then tell them what you just told them. Trying to understand what someone means when they use the term logo is tricky. For some, it's a word mark, others an icon. Some people consider it to be the brand. Wrong. When I use the word logo, I'm talking about the whole enchilada. If there is only a word mark, that's the logo. If there is an icon and a word mark, it's the two combined. The logo is the final form the audience should see. It's the formalware of the identity system. Combining an icon and word mark, as we've explored, reinforces the connection and recognition. The Target logo is a combination of the red icon and all caps letter forms. The system might provide the liberty to use the icon alone, but it will typically be seen combined as the formal logo. Other brands, NBC for example, use the same forms for both the letter forms and icon. The peacock symbol has straight lines and portions of circles. The letters are designed to match this. When British Petroleum merged with Amoco, they rebranded themselves as BP. The company then adopted a green starburst logo designed by Landor and promoted the message Beyond Petroleum. The combination of the icon and monogram communicated a fresh and innovative company engaged in green activities. Combining the two elements by dropping a symbol on top or next to the name is not the only solution. Merging the two in a unique way creates an easy-to-use logo that cannot be separated into two parts. The point of understanding the terminology of branding is not to create a complex new language. There are so many misunderstood terms that it's important to make sure you and your client are talking about the same thing. Don't take for granted that you know what they mean when they say logo. Take a few moments and explain your understanding of each term. Remember, they aren't designers. They're civilians who only know about these things from television shows with ad agencies like Mad Men or Bewitched. Before I determine whether the brand message requires a word mark, monogram, icon, or combination of these, I revisit the brand's defining attributes. These are my 5 to 8 words that my client and I agreed on in the research and strategy phase. Now that I've reminded myself what I'm communicating, I won't just be thrashing around trying anything. I may think I know what the solution is, but before I commit to one, I explore many variations of each type of logo. I start with a word mark. At some point, I will need to see the brand's name with or without an icon. Letter forms work together in surprising ways. What sounds good orally may look awful visually, so I need to try different fonts and arrangements. I begin in a program such as Adobe Illustrator. I set up several landscape format 11 by 17 pages. Next, I type in the name in any typeface. I duplicate this and end up with 4 rows across and 4 rows down. I should now have the brand name 16 times on the page. Now, this isn't wildly creative and may seem too simple, but I work my way down the fonts, trying each name in a different typeface. Some may look awful, and some even worse, but surprising things can happen, and right now isn't the time to stop and edit. Fill up a couple of pages with at least 32 variations. Now, even simpler, duplicate all of these and change the case to all caps. You now have 64 typographic variations of the brand name. Go back and look at the defining attributes. Based on these, choose the 2 that best align with these from each page. Put all of these on a new page. You've refined the selection down to 8 options. Take these 8 options and play with the arrangement if the brand has a name with more than one word. Try it stacked, horizontally. Change the scale of the words. Often when I do this, I find interesting interlocking options. From these options, select your favorite 3. Since a word mark that is simply typeset isn't proprietary, it's time to go in and start refining the letter forms. Work with each version until you reach a point that is strong and matches the brand attributes. This is no longer a word. This is an icon of a word. You don't need to refine it to death. At this stage, you're in draft phase. Once the client decides on one, you can go back and spend much more time refining. I've played out many versions of a word mark and narrowed the options down to 3. I feel pretty good about my solutions, but the job has only begun. Even if I don't think I need a monogram logo, I will explore the options. You never know, you might stumble onto something wonderful. Just as we did with the word mark study, I begin in a program such as Adobe Illustrator. I set up several landscape format 11 by 17 pages. Next, I type in the initial or initials. I duplicate this and end up with 4 rows across and 4 rows down. I should now have the 16 sets of the initials on each page. Again, as with the word mark, I work my way down the fonts, trying each combination in a different typeface. Don't stop and edit. Keep going and fill up a couple of pages with at least 32 variations. Duplicate all of these and change the case to all lowercase. You now have 64 typographic variations of the initials. Choose your favorite 8 options. Take these 8 options and play with the arrangement. Do the letter forms make interesting negative forms when they are connected? Is it easier to read the uppercase or lowercase versions? Are there similar shapes to the letters that can be made consistent, such as circles or lines? Try all kinds of combinations. But don't torture the letters. The worst monogram logos are the ones that look painful. If the letters don't naturally lend themselves to a modification, don't force it. Monograms are hard. They require an advanced skill in drawing letter forms, and they take time. You'll need to stop and look at the forms, trying to discover that unique element. And of course, the solution must communicate the brand's attributes. It's not easy, That's why designers deserve respect and compensation for these extremely rare talents. Overuse is one of the biggest issues with icons as logos. Since businesses tend to emulate other businesses that succeed, we've seen a repetition of strategy and mission. From a corner bistro to a Fortune 500 corporation, everyone wants to communicate growth, global thinking, innovation, community, and quality. The world is filled with thousands of meaningless icons that convey these ideas. This has led to logos that are indistinguishable from the next. Too many merging circles. I've found that the audience responds better to an icon that is a representation of a symbol or connected to the brand message. When I start designing an icon, I start with words. I take the defining attributes that my client and I have determined for the brand and write them down. Now, I brainstorm concepts that might serve as a symbol of each word. What symbolizes creativity? Is it a nest or a key? Is a compass a good symbol for innovation? I go down my list and assign symbols to each word. Now I explore different ways to express these symbols visually. I might sketch these on paper or begin working in Illustrator, referencing images. Again, don't worry about refining these too much yet. You might not use them. Once I've exhausted all of my symbols, I choose my favorites and refine them. Are there common forms I can use? The icon will have more harmony with echoing forms. To start, I work in black and white. I don't want to be swayed by color yet. Once I start refining, I refer back to the defining attributes and apply color. If innovative is one, my icon probably shouldn't look too antique. I also just keep moving along. Nobody needs to see your work here. If an icon turns out to be a real dog, leave it and move on to the next variation. You can always go back and see something you missed earlier. By the end of this process, you should have 3 or 4 possible symbols, drawn in a style that reflects the brand. Now it's time to put it all back together. By now, I've completed a study of word marks, monograms, and icons. I've narrowed my selections down on each one. Now it's time to combine them and determine what the complete logo will be. Of course, I still have my defining attributes taped to my wall, so I can refer to them and make sure I'm not riding off the rails. Most designers simply take an icon and stick it next to a word mark. That's half the job. The goal is to have a unified logo that feels harmonious and connected. This is a confluence of factors: shape, scale, and position. And it takes some exploring to reach the best solution. Start by using the same 11 by 17 format. Now take your 3 or 4 icon choices and place them on the page. Add your favorite word marks and monogram choices. Now it's time to mix and match. I know it doesn't sound particularly analytical, but you are slowly funneling your options down to a tighter selection. I combine each word mark with each icon. Next, combine each monogram with each icon. And finally, combine each word mark with the monograms. Like our other explorations, some of these will be bad, but you won't know that until you try it. And sometimes a combination I'm sure will not work looks great. Once you've completed this task, choose your favorite 3. On each logo, create a grid to unify the forms. Divide the height and width of the icon into several lines. Now create a grid of squares based on this. Each grid area is 1 unit. Does the icon scale to be 8 or 10 units tall? Is there 1 unit between the icon and word mark? Doing this helps ensure that the forms will be related and not arbitrary. Feel free to use half units or base the structure on the size of the type, and feel free to try options. The final version of this is now the lockup. If the icon and word mark are separated, the brand message could be weakened. This logo is the way they will always be combined. It is a single unit and piece of art that isn't adjustable by others using the logo. It sounds uptight, but you've taken the time to manifest abstract concepts of the brand message into a physical and visual form. That deserves respect. We remember visuals based on color and shape. A strong brand must be memorable and identifiable. Consider any major brand. You will remember the color. Major brands go to great lengths to find a unique color that they can own. They will use it repeatedly and consistently to create brand identification. Color can be the strongest and most proprietary part of a visual system. I don't need to see a logo on a Tiffany box. The turquoise color immediately identifies it. The blue is not copyrighted, but Tiffany has maintained strict standards to never deviate a little more blue or green. The consistent usage of the color gives it value. Other brands are easily identified with a color palette. Nickelodeon uses orange, Coca-Cola is red, and UPS is brown. Like the rest of the branding process, I start a palette with research. I do a color study of the competition. Make a diagram that shows which colors each of the other company uses. Typically, I'll find that they all will skew toward one palette. Now that I know that a certain palette dominates the field, I go the opposite direction. The point is to differentiate the brand from the others. Using blue because all other financial institutions use blue creates a brand that blends in. I choose a primary color based on the competition and values. This isn't the place to say, gee, I don't like purple, if the attributes are royal, vibrant, and luxurious. A secondary palette adds additional colors that unify the brand. These colors should never be left to chance. If yellow is one of the colors, the palette makes sure that everyone is using the same exact shade of yellow. As I mentioned in my course, Fundamentals of Layout and Composition, color is subjective. This is the place where you will need to remind your client the choice isn't about likes or dislikes, but what color best communicates the attributes. You've determined that one color is best as the primary color for your brand. But how do you then create the secondary palette or know what tones are best? Fortunately, this isn't as complicated as an electronics manual, but it does take exploration and courage. I have one folder in iPhoto where I save interesting color combinations I find. They can be on another piece of graphic design, something I find in the real world that I photograph, or an image from the internet. This takes some practice. Rather than focusing on the subject of the image, look at the colors. I also have a folder of color palettes that I've created using these images. These palettes haven't been applied to a client yet. They're a good place to start. My process to create these palettes isn't precise at this point. It's more of a gesture. I place the image in Adobe Illustrator and sample areas using the eyedropper tool. These colors give me a rough sense of the palette. If I like it, I need to go back in and determine the exact Pantone colors, CMYK, and RGB values. Let's presume I believe green is the best primary color for my client. My next step is to decide which green. I do this while I pull together the rest of the palette. I work with several shades of green before locking down one. Is it Kelly green, avocado green, or lime green? Next, I look at these options for the entire palette. These options can be whatever you want to explore. A palette can be based on gray tones, bright colors, subtle tones, pastels, warm or cold colors, primary colors, autumn, summer, or winter palettes. You'll find that one palette begins to feel better than the others and meets the brand attributes. Or you may decide you need another color. If so, add one. This is simply exploration. Once you've arrived at one color palette, you will need to have 3 versions. The first is based on Pantone colors. The second, CMYK values, for instances where Pantone colors aren't available. And finally, RGB values for the screen. When you determine the exact percentages with CMYK and RGB, there is no chance that someone with a color sense not as good as yours will try to make their own version. Remember, color is subjective. You might have the absolute best logic to support a palette, but the client may despise it. If he or she is absolutely adamant that it's wrong, either the attributes you are using need to be modified, or it's entirely emotional. And you can't reason with emotion. So make a new palette. A unified typographic style and typeface are as important as the color palette. A brand that employs many different typefaces on its communications will appear confused or worse, sloppy and unprofessional. It's amazing how well a simple and unified typographic palette can create a cohesive brand. There are two schools of thought regarding typefaces and the logo. One group believes that the primary typeface should be the same custom typeface as the logo. This provides unity and reinforces the visual consistency. The other approach resists this. Their argument is that using the same typeface on everything diminishes the logo's unique properties and damages its equity. In other words, when seen too often, it recedes into the background. I believe that the primary typeface should complement the logo, but not match it exactly. I look for a typeface that utilizes the same forms and ideas as the logo. If my logo is based on perfect geometric shapes, such as circles and lines, I might try Futura or Avenir. Both of these also use perfect geometry. I stay away from anything too trendy or unique. These fonts will look dated very soon or be difficult to apply to every situation. I use a sample brochure example as the place to explore the options. I set one line as a headline and create a block of text copy. Then I test several options. I may decide that the headline font works perfectly, but is hard to read as body copy. In that case, I'll add a typeface, perhaps a serif font. Again, I look for a typeface that has similar attributes to the headline font. Sabone is a good match in this instance. I want to find a typeface or two that are unique enough to become associated with the brand, such as Avenir and lynda.com. At the same time, I don't want a font that is too generic, such as Times Roman. Without a massive campaign, these generic fonts will never connect only to your brand. I understand the fine line here between unique and generic, and the issues of typographic knowledge. There may be thousands of typefaces in the world, but I've managed to work as a designer for 3 decades with only a dozen or so. Stay with the classic and well-drawn typefaces, and you'll do fine. Images are typically the most important element on a page or screen. We look at an image first, and then scan for words and shapes. A brand is defined not just by the logo, color, and type, but by the type and style of imagery. For decades, Coca-Cola employed illustrations in a specific style, depicting a healthy, all-American lifestyle. Apple has maintained an image style of beautifully lit products on a white background. And Nike portrays athletes in action with dramatic lighting and color. Looking at the brand attributes is the first step. First, what is the content of the imagery? Nike's imagery matches a brand about aspiring to be your best as an athlete. Is the content the product? If so, is it well designed enough to be the hero of a photo? Is the content of the imagery people? If so, the next question is who? Real people or celebrities, children or adults, families or individuals? This opens the door to issues such as race, gender, age, or nationality. Hopefully, you are working with a client that includes diversity in their attributes. Let's jump to a place where I've decided a wide range of people doing everyday activities communicates the brand's message. For example, honesty. I now need to decide what style of imagery is best. Should the images be black and white, Technicolor and posed, realistic and candid, or illustrations? Frankly, this boils down to creativity. In the instance of communicating honesty as an attribute, My choice is a realistic color photograph, but the choice may not always be that clear. Using the brochure example, try several styles. It's often a good idea to have 2 or 3 options to present to the client, so let him or her help make that decision. After all, it's their brand, and they know it better than you can. They may not be able to define a visual concept verbally, but will respond to the content and style of images. Patterns are often forgotten as a tool to build a visual system for a brand, but they can be incredibly successful, creating a unique and proprietary look. The 1968 Mexico City Olympics graphic program is one of the most successful examples of this. Lance Wyman created a system to brand these Olympic Games with patterns and colors taken from Mexican culture. The repeating and radiating stripes emulated Aztec iconography, and the vibrant tones reflected a Mexican color palette. The use of pattern was repeated consistently. The broad and bright color palette provided consistency without becoming dull. If the goal of a strong visual system is to identify the brand quickly without being told explicitly, this system succeeded incredibly well. We identify certain brands with pattern. The Burberry plaid, IBM stripes, or Lilly Pulitzer flowers. The McCord Museum branding system, designed by Cosette, is based on a series of lines that echo the letter forms. The system maintains a cohesive identity by employing a similar cropping of the stripe pattern. Paper, or special techniques like metallic foil, is another element that affects a brand's personality. Paper that is slick and glossy says something quite different from raw and rough. Automobile brands go to great expense to print brochures on high-quality paper and varnishes that display the product best. How it feels in the hands of a customer is as important as its appearance. On the other end of the scale, a brand committed to sustainable practices will choose recycled paper, perhaps in different colors or tones. The bottom line here is that every detail adds or subtracts from a brand's image. From the logo to the paper on the packaging, each visual and physical element will communicate the brand attributes. At this point, you have determined the message, attributes, and visual system. Now you need to present these to the client. You could email everything over and hope for the best, but being a designer is 80% persuasion. Persuading doesn't translate as making someone accept something they don't want. It's guiding the client down a path that reinforces the choices made. If the presentation is well made and logical, this has a good success rate. As I did with my presentation of the strategy, I'm going to work with an 11 by 17 landscape format document. This will project on a screen and work in printed form. My first pages restate the assignment. Again, this may fall in the hands of someone not at your presentation, and you want to make sure it's clear what you were asked to do. I recap the strategic thinking without replicating my first presentation. I list the brand attributes, the big message, and the target audience. Now the viewer has a background that will support my design solutions. I like my presentations to be written in plain English. If it's too fancy or uses terms only a designer understands, you lose the client's attention. Once I've established the strategic goals, I may have 2 or 3 design directions. First, I provide a list of my logo rules. Remember, the client doesn't know anything about this. If you can explain why these rules exist, your choices will make better sense. I then present a tightened version of the explorations, from typography to icon. This isn't to throw everything on the table. It shows that extensive studies led to your choices. It's a good way to stop someone from saying something like, "Hey, did you try making it a cup with a dog?" From these exploration pages, I narrow the choices and present each direction, first as a big and healthy logo, then the system page with color palette and typography, and as many applications of the logo as possible. No logo lives in a void. In order to understand how everything works together as a whole, I must show the system in action. You can make these applications in Adobe Photoshop or use a plugin such as LiveSurface. It's easier to visualize a solution and sell it when something looks real. I repeat the same sequence for any directions to show, but no more than 3. This just gets confusing. And end the presentation with a quotation that applies or simply a page that says, "Thank you." In addition to the physical presentation document or file for projection, there are several things you can do to aid the process of a presentation. First, and this may seem obvious, dress to impress. Even if it's a casual company, it shows respect when you take the time to look professional. When you begin the presentation, take command of the room. You don't need to yell at anyone. Just make it clear you're confident and the expert. You wouldn't want a doctor meeting with you timidly and nervous. State what you want the final outcome of the presentation to be. People need to know what the goal is. For example, you might say, "By the end of this meeting, I'd like to walk away with one design direction and begin refining the visuals." When presenting, never read the text on the screen or page. Hopefully, the viewer can read. You don't need to repeat what is there, but embellish it. If anyone has a question, stop and listen. If you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, "I don't have an answer for that right now, but I'll find it." Never ever say no. There are too many designers that kill what might be an interesting idea because it doesn't seem possible or appropriate. I prefer to say yes if, because anything is possible with the right resources. Remember, clients aren't designers. They don't have the vocabulary to express the design concept, and they can only suggest something they already have seen. If someone stops you and says, "Why can't we have 15 logos and no restrictions on color?" the better response is, "That's interesting. Why do you think that is right for this?" Maybe they think the company values are about no rules or restrictions. You can work with that and might come up with an interesting version of your solution. Once we've gone through the presentation, I ask for any comments. I also state what the next step is moving forward and restate the outcome and course at the end of the meeting so it's clear we're all on the same page. Designers tend to have a bad reputation with clients. I've heard many complain that their last designer yelled at them or flipped out at meetings if someone disagreed or was a neurotic mess. Stay away from this. What we do is serious business, but be patient and kind. Everyone in the room has the same goal, for the project to succeed. And throwing a chair because someone didn't like your color palette looks bad. Now that you've completed this enormous task of designing a brand message and visual system, it's time to create the standards manual. The standards manual is a set of instructions. It lets the user know how to design with your identity system. These exist to maintain consistency over time. Without this, your system will slowly erode when used by others. One designer may decide to add colors or change them entirely. Another might decide Garamond is much better than the universe you selected. Very quickly, all the efforts of maintaining a clear brand message have disappeared. Back in the days before the digital revolution, standards manuals were giant, clunky, and complicated manuals. Every application of the identity system was depicted in detail. Nothing was left to chance. And since the work was being produced manually, without digital templates, this was necessary. Since then, the job of a standards manual has become simpler. All of the elements, from the logo to the stationery system, exist in digital form. So the manual has become more of a brand messaging guideline. A standards manual can be as dull as a doorknob or more playful. I prefer it to be more interesting than an electronics manual. Like all design, you want to seduce the viewer and engage them. The manual exists for the designer using the logo, color palette, and other brand visual elements. It also exists to remind the client or client's employees why this visual program exists and communicates the brand strategy. Standards manuals used to be big binders with removable pages. This allowed for updates and changes over time. Today, the manual can be whatever format you decide works best. Where will it be most useful and not ignored? It can be a poster, tiny book, or traditional publication. Whatever the printed form, it will also exist as a PDF file to live on the user's desktop. A standards manual's content may vary depending on the client, but there are basic components in each manual. We'll cover these in the next lesson, Standards Manuals 2. Now that we've discussed the reasons and possible formats for a standards manual, let's dig into its contents. First, you might have a short note from the CEO or owner. This is a good message that the boss endorses this. It's a good reminder that the brand message and identity system is not a voluntary choice. I then add the brand messages and attributes. This helps the user understand why they are using these identity system elements and what they are communicating. Second, the logo is shown in full color, black and white, and white. Give each of these examples space. The point is to make it exciting and dramatic. Tiny logos just look unimpressive. Third, show the logo's architecture, minimum size allowance, and clearance space. This makes sure someone doesn't shrink the logo so small it's illegible, or put another element too close to the logo and change it. I add a page here to show what is okay to do with the logo and what is not okay to do. But don't overdo it on the don't page. It makes the system prison-like. I like to show the color palette as more than just a row of colors. The point is to make this look exciting to use. Each color is displayed with the Pantone number, CMYK values, and RGB values. Next, the typography palette. Show the entire alphabet of all the typefaces you have chosen. Make it clear if the face has different weights, whether these are okay to use or not. For many years, Gap maintained Helvetica Medium Roman as the only option, not Helvetica Light, Black, or Italic. Then, if you've chosen a set of patterns or materials, show them and let the user know how and when to use them. The images are next. Show examples of the type of imagery in your system. Make sure the content is clear, as is the photo and illustration style. If there is a specific style that is created digitally, provide the process to do it. Now you've provided the user with all the building blocks they need to design items that will be consistent and communicate the brand message. But I like to show examples of this. These help clarify what the goal is. Think of it as showing the completed car on a model kit. Finish the manual with instructions for help. List the person to contact if something isn't clear or someone needs more information. This person is usually the brand manager or communications lead. Don't list yourself. If you do, you'll become a 24-hour on-call information desk. And hopefully, you'll be busy with your next branding project. The Standards Manual is the right tool for designers, marketing directors, and outside creative agencies. It gives the end user the tools to follow the identity system and brand message. But civilians or non-designers don't really care about the clearance space around a logo. For them, a brand vision book explains the brand in less technical terms. A brand vision book is less a usage manual and more of an overview of the brand's history, ideals, goals, and message. Like the Standards Manual, a vision book can be any format. There are books that are as small as a Post-it note with 200 pages, or a group of publications. I prefer a size that is manageable and can fit on a shelf. The less it feels like a dogmatic document of rules, the better. Again, the goal is to seduce the viewer. The information should be exciting and engaging. Make a welcome kit for new employees with a brand vision book and other useful items. Since people respond to images more and less to large blocks of text, I liberally use imagery to explain an idea. Rather than stating, "We care about our employees," in text, show an image of an employee. It's best to never say you're smart, caring, cool, or whatever. Demonstrate it. Rather than using multiple paragraphs explaining the brand, do it with text like quotes from the CEO or founder. Or find other pieces of information that support the vision. Brand vision books work best if they are varied. This isn't a manual, so design every spread like its own poster. You're also using the elements of the identity system to make the vision book, proving that it works. The images should match the content and style you've specified for the system. Stick with the colors and typefaces also. You want the viewer to be excited about the visual system and understand why it communicates the brand message. The Vision Book is the place to let your hair down and have fun. Nobody wants to work for a company that is dull, uptight, and rigid. Even the most staid professions now need to communicate their brand message in an exciting and dramatic way. This is the place to have fun. You've finalized the brand message, identity system, standards manual, and Vision Book. Now it's time to pass everything over to the client. I typically suggest that I design everything for the first year to work out any kinks and make sure it stays on track, but that isn't always possible. In those instances, the baby is turned over to its new parents. Creating and organizing all the files is a critical process. Someone else who knows nothing about the project may need to work with the identity system elements. The files must be as clear as possible and hopefully protected from tampering. First, every logo should be set up on its own page. All fonts and rules should be outlined. The logo should be grouped as a whole. Each color version has been saved and named specifically as logo CMYK, logo RGB, logo black, and logo white. The color palette is the same. Place the entire palette on one page. Eliminate any extra colors from the swatch palette and save the versions you've converted as color palette PMS, color palette CMYK, and color palette RGB. It's not legal to turn over a font that you purchased for yourself to the client. They will need to buy that typeface themselves. I add a folder for typefaces and put a document in there that lists the fonts and where to purchase it. Any imagery that exists should be placed in a folder, again, as CMYK and RGB versions. Once all of the elements have been saved and named, I make a directory of the files as a PDF. Put all of this in one folder, Client Identity System, and turn it over to the new owner. If you've marked everything clearly and made sure the files match their names, another user should be able to find the correct file for whatever project he or she is doing. Now, here is the hardest part of the whole job. You've created an amazing solution with time, hard work, and energy, but you are now sending it out into the world on its own. It isn't yours anymore. Like a teenager leaving home for the first time, you can only hope you've provided the best information and guidelines, and it will succeed. Branding is challenging, so first congratulate yourself on working through this course. It's a lot of information that doesn't always have one simple answer. It's not going to be possible to recall every single thing we discussed all at once. Take it step by step. Think of baby steps, not giant leaps. Even if it's 100% clear to you, your client is new to this and may need time to work with the process. Let's recap. Our job with a brand is to look at the whole picture, research the brand from top to bottom, and find weaknesses and strengths. We take all the information and determine a message that will support the client's values and goals. We can identify issues out of our sphere, the visual communications, but aren't qualified to solve a factory distribution problem. Once you and your client have agreed on a message and list of brand attributes, you can begin the visual studies, always referring back to the attributes. The logo, which is a logo, not a brand, is the basis of an entire visual system made up of color, typography, imagery, and materials. Remember to never show a logo all alone on a page. Apply it to something like a business card, t-shirt, brochure, or any other application. This way the client will see it in action, surrounded by the entire visual system. When the project is finished and you've turned over the visual assets and the manual, you can be proud that you did more than make a pretty logo. You helped a client succeed and hopefully create jobs, which allow people to put braces on their kids, send them to college, and have a better life. That's the true value of great branding.